Hey friends, I recently noticed that almost 80% of viewers who enjoy these videos haven't subscribed yet. If you like the stories and want to see more, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement makes a huge difference and helps these stories reach more people. Thanks so much for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. I'd love to know. There's this lake up north that my brothers and I used to swear belonged only to us. It wasn't marked on any official map, and maybe that's what made it special. Hidden behind miles of dirt road and thick woods, it felt like the kind of place where time didn't bother to pass. We'd bring a small cooler, a few rods, and sometimes an old lantern that buzzed more than it glowed. I don't think we ever caught anything worth bragging about, but that wasn't really the point. For years, those late-night fishing trips were our escape. Just three brothers, a still lake, and the kind of quiet that makes you forget the world exists. It was remote. Too remote, maybe. You could scream out there, and the only thing that would answer was the echo. Most nights went the same. We'd get there just as the sun dipped behind the pines, set up along the rocky bank, and let the night take over. The sound of crickets, the smell of damp moss, the slow rhythm of casting and waiting. It became our ritual. There was peace in it, predictability. But like every place that feels too peaceful, something eventually breaks the pattern. It was one of those nights, calm, silver fog creeping over the water, when I noticed it. A shape, or maybe a person, standing waist-deep in the middle of the lake. I remember blinking, convinced my eyes were playing tricks. But when I nudged my brother and pointed, he froze too. The shape didn't move, didn't splash. It just stood there, perfectly still, as if it had always been part of the lake. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe another fisherman, maybe a swimmer who lost their bearings. But as the fog lifted for a moment, moonlight caught on her face, pale, still, watching. And somehow, I knew before she spoke that we weren't supposed to be there. That was the night I first saw her, the woman beneath the water. The words, when they finally came, weren't spoken aloud. They didn't need to be. They were a current that passed between the three of us, a shared understanding that snapped into place the moment my oldest brother, Mark, let out a slow, shaky breath. It was a sound I'd never heard from him before, a crack in his usual granite composure. We aren't supposed to be here. The woman in the water didn't move. She was a statue carved from moonlight and mist, her form both solid and eerily insubstantial. The silver fog, which moments before had felt romantic and mysterious, now felt like a shroud. Clinging to the surface of the lake and to her pale shoulders, her hair, dark and slick, lay flat against her skull and fanned out around her in the water, tendrils of it reaching like the roots of some deep-water plant. Her eyes were the worst part. They weren't menacing, not in any way I could name. They were just empty. Two dark pools that seemed to absorb the weak light from our sputtering lantern rather than reflect it. They were fixed on us, I became acutely aware of every sound, as if the volume of the world had been turned up. The bzzt, bzzt of the old lantern, which we'd always joked was our chorus of crickets, now sounded like a frantic alarm. The gentle lap-lap of water against the rocky shore was the ticking of a clock counting down the seconds of our intrusion. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, so loud I was sure the woman could hear it from the middle of the lake. Mark was the first to break the tableau. He was 22, built solid from a summer of construction work, and the de facto captain of our little crew. His voice, when it came, was low and tight, a forced calm that did nothing to hide the tension beneath. "Hey," he called out, the word cutting through the quiet like a gunshot. "You okay out there?" The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. The shape didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge him in the slightest. She just remained, a fixed point in the center of our world, which had, until 5 minutes ago, been entirely our own. My other brother, Jax, 17 and all nervous energy, shifted beside me, his fishing rod clattering against a rock. "Maybe she's hurt," he whispered, his voice cracking on the last word. "Maybe she's in shock." It was a rational thought, the kind you grab onto when the world stops making sense. A swimmer in trouble, a lost hiker disoriented by the fog. But the lake was glacier-fed, its water a cold that stole your breath even on the hottest August afternoon. No one would be swimming here, not willingly, not at night. And the way she stood, it was all wrong. The lake wasn't shallow. We knew its contours better than the lines on our own palms. Out where she was, the bottom dropped away into a deep, dark bowl. You'd need to be 10 feet tall to stand there. "The water's too deep," I said, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. I was the youngest, 16 and the designated worrier. "She can't be standing." Mark shot me a look, a silent command to shut up. He tried again, his voice louder, more authoritative. "Ma'am, can you hear us? Do you need help?" Nothing. Only the echo of his own voice bouncing back from the far pines, a hollow, mocking reply. The memory of how the night had begun pressed in on me then, a painful, beautiful contrast to the cold dread now coiling in my gut. We'd arrived just as the sun was bleeding out behind the jagged line of pines, setting the sky on fire in shades of orange and purple. The air was already turning crisp, carrying the rich, loamy scent of wet soil and decaying leaves. "Told you we should have brought the bigger cooler," Jax had grumbled, hefting our small, beat-up igloo as he climbed out of Mark's truck. "And I told you you'd just drink all the soda in the first hour," Mark had retorted, slamming the driver's door. The sound had been swallowed by the woods instantly. "You have the self-control of a squirrel." I just smiled, breathing it all in. This was the ritual. The gentle bickering was as much a part of it as the fishing itself. We'd trudged down the familiar, narrow path, our boots crunching on pine needles, until the trees parted and the lake lay before us, a perfect, dark mirror holding the last fragments of the dying light. It was a sight that never failed to quiet the noise in my head. The social anxieties of high school, The low-grade tension that always hummed in our house since Dad left, the vague, shapeless worry about the future, it all just melted away here, leaving nothing but the three of us and the immense, forgiving quiet. We'd set up on our usual stretch of bank, a flat, rocky promontory that jutted slightly into the water. Jax had fired up the lantern, its familiar, anemic glow pushing back the deepening twilight in a small, buzzing circle. The rods came next, the ritual of untangling line, baiting hooks with night crawlers we'd dug up from the garden, the soft plunk as the weights hit the water. This was the peace, the predictability, the slow, rhythmic casting and waiting, the comfortable silence broken only by the occasional shared observation, a shooting star, the cry of a loon, Jax complaining about a snag. This lake was our sanctuary. It was where Mark had told us, his voice thick with a rare emotion, that he was moving out in the fall to take a job 2 states over. It was where Jax had confessed, staring into the water, that he was terrified of failing his senior year. It was where I felt, for a few hours at a time, less like an awkward kid and more like just a brother. This place held our secrets. It was supposed to be ours. The first ripple had been easy to dismiss. I saw it out of the corner of my eye, a small concentric circle forming on the far side of the lake, away from the breeze. A fish jumping, maybe. A turtle? We'd gone back to our quiet conversation, talking about nothing. The new car Mark wanted, a movie we were planning to see. Then another ripple came, closer. Then another, a series of them, as if something was moving just beneath the surface, traveling from the deep shadows near the opposite shore towards the center. The water there was black, inky, a void. "You see that?" Jax had murmured, his line forgotten. We all saw it. A dark mass was rising, slow and deliberate, causing the water to bulge upwards without breaking the surface. My mind raced through possibilities. A log, buoyed by trapped gases, a beaver, a moose. But the shape was all wrong. It was too vertical, too still. And then the fog had shifted, drawn to that spot as if by a magnet, and the shape had clarified. It resolved into shoulders, a neck, a head, a person. Now, standing and frozen on the bank, the memory of that peaceful arrival felt like something from another lifetime. The woman was still there, unmoving. The initial shock was hardening into a deep, primal fear. This wasn't a lost swimmer. This was something else. "We have to go," Jax said, his voice trembling. He was already backing away from the water's edge. Mark didn't move. He was squinting, his fisherman's eyes trying to pierce the gloom. She's so pale." And she was. In the moments when the mist thinned, her skin seemed to gleam with a faint, internal luminescence, like the belly of a fish. It was a dead, waxy pallor that spoke of depths and coldness and things that never saw the sun. Then, as we watched, paralyzed, her head tilted, just a fraction. It wasn't a human gesture of curiosity. It was the slow, deliberate movement of a predator identifying its prey. Her dark eyes, which had been a unified void, seemed to pinpoint each of us in turn. Mark, then Jax, then me. A jolt, cold and electric, shot down my spine. There was no question anymore. No rationalization. The lake, our secret, sacred place, had a heart, and it was standing in the center of the water, watching us with ancient, hollow eyes. We had trespassed in a place that did not belong to us, and we were being seen, truly seen. The woman beneath the water had found us. The silence that followed her unnerving, pinpoint gaze was a physical weight, pressing the air from our lungs. It was Jax who broke first, his voice a strangled whisper that was meant to be quiet, but tore through the stillness like a scream. "How is she doing that?" Mark didn't answer. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching in his cheek. His hands, usually so sure and capable, were curled into white-knuckled fists at his sides. We were all caught in the same terrible inertia, a deer in the headlights freeze that was rooted not just in fear, but in a profound, world-breaking confusion. The rules of reality, as we understood them, did not include pale women standing impossibly in the center of a deep, dark lake. And then she spoke. Her voice was not what I expected. There was no echo of the deep, no gurgling wetness. It was calm, clear, and carried across the water with an unnatural resonance, as if the lake itself were a speaker. It sounded practiced, like a line delivered from a stage. "You don't have to be afraid." The words should have been comforting. They were anything but. They were flat, devoid of the warmth that should accompany them. It was a statement of fact, not a reassurance. "My name is Christy R. King." Christy R. King. The name hung in the mist, ordinary and yet utterly bizarre in this context. It was a real name, a modern name. It belonged to a woman who might work in an office or live in a suburb, not a specter in a forgotten northern lake. My mind, desperate for any handhold, latched onto it. Maybe she is just a person, a weird, lost person. But the details betrayed that hope. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out more of her. She wore a simple, light-colored dress, but it was pristine. There were no water stains, no clinging weeds, no wrinkles from being submerged. It looked dry. Her face, too, was a mask of perfection. The pale skin was unblemished, smooth, and oddly untextured, like porcelain. She was beautiful in the way a mannequin is beautiful, flawless and utterly lifeless. "Christy," Mark called back, his voice gaining a shred of its former strength. He was trying to reestablish control, to drag this situation back into the realm of the normal. Are you in some kind of trouble? Do you need us to call someone?" A low, nervous giggle escaped Jax. "Call who, Mark? The Ghostbusters?" It was his default setting. Deflect fear with a joke. But the laughter died in his throat, brittle and hollow. The woman, Christy, didn't answer Mark's question. She simply stared, her head still tilted at that slight, unnatural angle. The fog around us was thickening, coiling up from the water's surface like cold breath. I glanced behind me, and a jolt of panic shot through me. The shoreline, Our path back to the truck was gone, swallowed by a wall of solid white. "The fog," I whispered, my throat tight. "It's closing in." We were being wrapped in a cocoon of mist, isolated with this thing. The world had shrunk to this small circle of rocky shore, the buzzing lantern, and the still watching figure in the water. "This is insane," Jax muttered, his bravado crumbling. "This is seriously insane. Let's just go, right now." "And walk blind through the woods in this?" Mark snapped, his own fear turning to anger. "We'd be lost in 2 minutes. We have to wait it out." It was then that Christy spoke again, her placid voice cutting through their argument. "Jackson." The name landed like a physical blow. Jax flinched as if he'd been struck. His full name. No one called him Jackson, except our mom when she was furious. Her dark eyes shifted. "Mark." Mark took a half step backward, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. Then, those empty pools fixed on me. A coldness that had nothing to do with the night air seeped into my bones. She knew us. She knew our names. We had never introduced ourselves. We had never seen her before in our lives. The last shred of rational explanation. A stranded stranger, a coincidental encounter, evaporated into the suffocating mist. "Stephen." My name, in that calm, rehearsed voice, felt like a violation. It was a claim, a branding. As she spoke my name, our old lantern, which had buzzed faithfully for years, sputtered violently. The light flickered, dimmed to a sickly orange glow, and for one heart-stopping second, threatened to die completely. In the sudden, deeper darkness, I saw it, a series of ripples moving across the water. They weren't radiating from her. They were moving toward us, against the gentle breeze, as if something was swimming just beneath the surface, closing the distance. A strange compulsion washed over me, a pull that was both magnetic and deeply instinctual, screaming at me to look away. But I couldn't. I was transfixed. I had to see. I had to look directly into her eyes, to find some spark of humanity, some explanation in those dark depths. I forced my gaze upward, past the pale column of her throat, past the placid line of her mouth, and met her stare. The emptiness there was absolute. It was not the emptiness of a void, but the emptiness of something old and vast and utterly indifferent. I felt dizzy, the world tilting on its axis. My vision blurred at the edges, the mist and the water and the night sky swirling into a single nauseating vortex centered on her face. And in that moment of disorienting connection, I realized the truth. She was no longer standing. The water now lapped at her shoulders. Her body was horizontal, suspended just beneath the surface. Her hair fanned out around her like a black halo, and her dress floated, weightless, in the dark water. Her eyes, still open, still fixed on mine, were now looking up from below. She was floating, motionless, as if she had been lying there all along, a corpse laid to rest in the heart of our lake. The woman, Christy R. King, was beneath the water. And she was smiling. The scream that tore from my throat was less a sound and more a physical reaction, a final, desperate expulsion of the terror that had been coiling inside me. "She's under." It broke the spell. The three of us moved as one, a single organism governed by pure, undiluted instinct. We didn't grab the rods, the cooler, the lantern that was still flickering its frantic, dying light. We just ran. Our boots slipped on the wet, moss-slick stones, but we didn't slow down. The wall of fog swallowed us whole, and the world became a cold, blinding whiteness. Behind us, the lake, our sanctuary, was no longer still. Christie's voice erupted from the water. It was no longer calm or rehearsed. It was a raw, scraping sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating in the mist, in the air, in the very marrow of our bones. "Come back." It was a command, layered with a century of loneliness and a sudden, shocking fury. The word "back" echoed, not from the pines, but from the water itself, repeating in a diminishing chorus that sounded like a multitude of voices gurgling into silence. And the water obeyed her. I risked one glance over my shoulder and wished I hadn't. A wave was building, not a natural wave pushed by wind, but a ripple that moved against all logic, gathering the surface of the lake and pushing it toward the shore. It wasn't tall or crashing. It was a swift, dark tongue of water, slithering over the rocks we had just vacated, soaking the earth where we had stood moments before. It was searching. We crashed through the undergrowth, branches whipping at our faces and arms, blind and panicked. The path was invisible, but Mark, driven by a primal sense of direction, led the charge. The truck was our only sanctuary, a tether to the world that made sense. We fell against it, fumbling for the doors, piling into the cab in a heap of gasping, trembling limbs. "Go, Mark, go," Jax yelled, his voice cracking. Mark twisted the key. The engine roared to life, a blessedly normal mechanical sound. He slammed the truck into reverse, spinning us around on the narrow dirt track, then threw it into drive. The headlights stabbed into the fog, illuminating the spectral trunks of trees. As the beams swept across the edge of the lake, I saw it. Or, I didn't see it. The light hit the surface of the water, the disturbed, rippling water where she had been, and her reflection wasn't there. The light showed only the dark, churning water and the tendrils of mist. The physics of the world had been broken. She was a thing that cast no shadow, held no reflection. Mark didn't stop. He drove too fast, the truck lurching and bouncing over the ruts in the dirt road. None of us spoke. The only sounds were our ragged breathing and the frantic swish-swish of the windshield wipers trying to clear the clinging mist. We were maybe a mile down the road, the tightness in my chest just beginning to unclench when I made the mistake of looking into the rearview mirror. She was there, walking down the center of the dirt road behind us, her pace steady and unhurried. The pristine dress was soaked now, clinging to her form, and water streamed from her hair and clothes. But her face was unchanged, that same placid, pale mask, the dark eyes fixed ahead, on our truck. She wasn't running. She didn't need to. She was just following. A relentless, inevitable fact. "She's behind us," I whispered, my voice hoarse. Mark's eyes flicked to his own mirror and his foot slammed down on the accelerator. The truck surged forward, and when I looked again, the road behind us was empty. Nothing but fog and darkness. The week that followed was a blur of strained silence and forced normalcy. We told our mom we'd seen a bear, a big one, and it had spooked us. She'd accepted it with a worried frown. We didn't talk about it with each other. It was too big, too fragile. To speak of it felt like poking a sleeping beast. The memory of the lake was a cold stone in my gut. It was Mark who called me into his room, his face ashen. He held his phone out to me. On the screen was a local news article from the digital archives, dated 10 years prior. Drowning victim. Recovered from hidden lake. The article was short, a tragic footnote. A woman named Christy R. King, 22, had been reported missing after telling friends she was going hiking near the unmarked lakes north of town. After a 3-day search, her body was recovered from the very same lake we knew. The article included a small, grainy photo. It was her. The same face, the same features. The woman we had spoken to had been dead for a decade. The confirmation was worse than the mystery. The world felt thin, like a cheap canvas with a terrible painting showing through from the other side. That night, the dreams began. I'd be walking, and I'd hear the drip of a faucet or the splash of a puddle, and her voice would weave through the sound, a whisper tangled in static. "Stephen." It was a hook in my soul, a constant, low-grade pull toward any source of water. I started avoiding the sink, the shower, the rain. We never went back to the lake. None of us ever suggested it. But the story didn't end with us. A few months later, Jax heard it from a guy who knew a guy. Some other anglers, the brave or foolish type who liked fishing spots off the map, had been up there. They'd gotten turned around in an unusual sudden fog. And on the still, cold air, they'd heard it. A woman's voice, calm and clear, calling out from the center of the mist-covered water. They said it didn't sound like a cry for help. They said it sounded like an invitation or a command. "Come back." Subscribe if you think people deserve warnings about dangerous places. They never put up signs at that lake. They never told anyone about Christy. Don't be like the town that stayed silent. Hit that button if you believe knowledge could save a life. If you've ever ignored a bad feeling about a location, comment, "Trust your instincts." There's a particular kind of quiet you only find in the marsh. It ain't a true quiet. Not like you'd find in some empty desert or a snow-covered field. No, this quiet is a lie. It's a thick, living blanket of sound that just smothers everything else. The constant, guttural croak of frogs, the buzz of a million unseen insects, the wet, sucking sound the mud makes when the water pulls away. It's a noise that gets inside your head and makes its own kind of silence. Me and Russell, we called it the swamp's heartbeat. You sure this thing is seaworthy, Captain? Russell's voice cut through the haze, a familiar welcome anchor. I grinned, patting the side of the bright orange fishing kayak we'd just lowered into the black water. She's more seaworthy than your old John boat, that's for damn sure. And she don't leak. That boat had character, Russell retorted, hefting our small cooler down from the back of my truck. This thing looks like a giant Cheeto. That was Russell, my best friend since we were kids throwing lines off the public pier. Where I was lean and quiet, he was built solid and never shut up. Where I planned, he plunged. It was why this worked. We were testing the new kayak in the Bayou Foch, a sprawling, labyrinthine network of waterways that was just isolated enough to feel like an adventure without being downright suicidal. At least, that's what I told myself. The air was a warm, wet towel pressed against your face. A dense fog, common for an early morning in late spring, clung to the water, reducing the world to a 50-foot circle of visibility. The cypress trees rose from the murk like skeletal giants, their gray beards of Spanish moss stirring in a breeze we couldn't feel. In the distance, a low rumble of thunder promised a storm later. But for now, the world was preternaturally still. Old man LeBlanc at the gas station gave me the side eye when I told him where we were headed. I said, pushing us off from the bank with my paddle. The water was the color of strong tea, and you couldn't see more than an inch below the surface. What did he say? Russell asked, settling into the front seat. Said the Foch has a different kind of current. Said the swamp here takes what it wants, and it's best not to look too interesting. I chuckled, trying to shake off the memory of the old man's serious, wrinkled face. Probably just trying to scare the city boys. Russell laughed, a loud, easy sound that echoed oddly in the fog. City boys. Will, your family's been here longer than the crawfish. He gestured around us with his paddle. This is our backyard. Ain't nothing here that ain't been here for 1,000 years. We paddled in comfortable silence for a while, the twin dips of our paddles the only rhythm in the swamp's chaotic symphony. The fog was thick, swallowing our wake almost instantly. It was easy to get turned around out here, to lose all sense of direction. The landmarks were all the same: cypress, water, moss, mud. This is the life, man, Russell sighed contentedly, cracking open a soda. No boss, no traffic, just us, the fish, and a million mosquitoes planning our assassination. I nodded, but a prickle of unease was working its way up my spine. LeBlanc's words were rattling around in my head. Takes what it wants. It was nonsense, old superstition. But the fog felt heavier now, more intentional. The croaking of the frogs seemed to have died down a little, leaving a pocket of that deceptive, heavy quiet around our kayak. The first sign of real trouble was a comical one. Russell, trying to get a better angle for a picture of a heron, fumbled with his brand new phone. It slipped from his grasp, did a clumsy flip in the air, and landed with a soft plop, right at the edge of a dense thicket of reeds and mud. Ah, hell, he groaned. Brand new. That thing's not even paid for. We paddled over. The phone was submerged in about a foot of water, its shiny black case visible against the dark mud. "Might be okay if we get it fast," I said, though I doubted it. "It's fresh water at least." "Yeah, hold on." Russell, ever the impulsive one, didn't even think twice. He swung his legs over the side of the kayak, his boots sinking into the black, oozing mud of the bank. "Don't let the Cheeto float away." The kayak rocked gently as he stood, his feet making wet, sucking sounds as he took 2 careful steps toward the phone. He bent down, his fingers closing around the slick case. "Got it," he said, triumph in his voice. He straightened up, holding the dripping device. He wiped it on his jeans and pressed the power button. Screen's black, totally toast. "Sarah's gonna kill me. I told her it was a dumb expense, but she said—" He stopped talking. Not like he'd finished his sentence. More like the words were snipped off with a pair of scissors. Mid-sentence. Mid-thought. I looked over at him. He was still standing there, phone in hand, but he was utterly motionless. He wasn't looking at the phone anymore. He was staring straight ahead into the thick wall of fog and cypress trees. "Russ, what is it?" I asked, a knot tightening in my stomach. "You see a gator?" He didn't answer. He didn't move a muscle. It was the kind of stillness you see in a deer right before it bolts. A total, frozen lockup. "Russell? Man, you're freaking me out. What do you see?" Slowly, very slowly, his head turned toward me. His face was blank, his eyes wide, but not with fear. They looked empty, like someone had flipped a switch off inside him. His mouth was slightly agape. He dropped the phone. It landed in the mud with a dull thud. Forgotten. He took a step, not back towards the kayak, away from it, deeper into the marsh. His boot sank into the black ooze up to his ankle. "Whoa, hey," I said, my voice rising. "Wrong way, dude. The boat's right here." He took another step, and then another. He was moving with a slow, deliberate purpose that was entirely not Russell. He was walking into the swamp, towards nothing, as if he'd heard his name called from the fog. The frogs had gone completely silent. The only sound was the thick, greedy suck of the mud pulling at his boots with every step, pulling him down, pulling him in. For a heartbeat that stretched into an eternity, I just stared. This had to be a joke. A stupid, ill-timed Russell prank. He'd turn around any second with that big, dumb grin of his and say, "Gotcha, you should see your face." But he didn't turn. He just kept walking, wading deeper into the tea-colored water, which was now up to his thighs. "Russell!" I screamed, my voice tearing through the swamp's false quiet. "Stop!" The command had no effect. He was a sleepwalker, a puppet on a string I couldn't see. The water was at his waist now, the thick, peaty mud pulling at him with every step. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced my disbelief. I scrambled in the kayak, my movements clumsy and frantic. I grabbed the spare paddle, leaning out over the water, stretching it toward him. "Grab it, Russ! Grab the paddle!" His back was to me. He gave no indication he'd heard. The water lapped at his chest. Then it happened. It wasn't a slow submersion. It was a violent, sudden yank. 1 second he was there, a solid form against the flat, murky water. The next, he was gone, vanished, as if a trap door had opened in the marsh floor. The sound was what would haunt me. A thick, churning splash, immediately followed by a furious eruption of bubbles. Big, gulping bubbles that broke the surface with a sound like wet, popping blisters. Then, a single, muffled scream that was cut off with a sickening, watery gurgle. The world snapped into a hyper-focused, nightmare clarity. The kayak rocked violently as I lunged for the spot, screaming his name over and over. The bubbles continued to roil the surface, a frantic, dying signal. I could see nothing beneath the opaque water, nothing but churning darkness. The entire struggle lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The bubbles ceased, the water stilled. The swamp's symphony of frogs and insects, which had fallen silent, did not return. A total, absolute stillness descended, heavier and more terrifying than any sound. He was gone. The marsh had taken him. "No," I whispered, the word a broken thing. "No, no, no." I was fumbling for my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip it, when the surface broke again. He exploded upwards with a gasp that was more of a ragged, desperate shriek. Water streamed from his hair, his face, his mouth. His eyes were wide, the whites showing all around, rolling in their sockets like a spooked horse. He flailed, arms slapping at the water, choking and sputtering. "Will!" he shrieked, his voice cracking with a terror I'd never heard in another human being. "Will!" I thrust the paddle toward him again, and this time, his wild, panicked eyes locked onto it. He scrambled for it, his fingers slipping on the wet fiberglass before finally clamping on like a vice. I pulled, putting all my weight into it, hauling him back toward the kayak. He was dead weight, scrambling and kicking, his movements uncoordinated with sheer panic. He collapsed over the side of the kayak, half in, half out, heaving and vomiting marsh water. The little boat dipped precariously, taking on water. I didn't care. I grabbed the collar of his soaked shirt, pulling, dragging him fully into the vessel. He curled into a fetal position in the bottom of the kayak, trembling uncontrollably, his breath coming in ragged, hitching sobs. "It had hands," he choked out, the words barely intelligible between gasps. "Will, it had hands." I followed his wild, downward gesture. His right jeans leg was ripped, torn clean through just above the ankle. And there, on his pale, wet skin, were the marks. They weren't scratches from a branch or the rake of an animal's claw. They were bruises, already a deep, livid purple. 4 of them, perfect circular welts, each the size of a large coin, arranged in a cruel, deliberate arc. They looked like massive suction cups, the kind you'd see on a giant octopus. The skin in the center of each circle was raised and broken, not bleeding, but weeping a clear, watery fluid. I couldn't breathe. I just stared at those marks. They were proof, tangible, physical evidence of the impossible. A low, gurgling sound drew my eyes back to the water. Where Russell had been pulled under, the surface was boiling, not from heat, but from some violent agitation below. The dark water churned and frothed, and for a single heart-stopping moment, I thought I saw a thick, dark shape, like a mass of ropey vines, or a limb the color of the mud, just beneath the surface before it slid away. "We have to go. Now," I said, my voice a low, urgent command. I didn't wait for a response. I shoved him the rest of the way into the kayak, ignoring the water sloshing around our ankles. I grabbed my paddle and dug into the water, turning us with a strength born of pure terror. We abandoned everything. The new rods, the cooler, Russell's ruined phone. None of it mattered. I paddled like the devil himself was at our heels. The kayak, overloaded and low in the water, felt sluggish and unresponsive. The fog clung to us, disorienting and thick. Behind us, I heard it. A soft, persistent swish, swish, swish. A sound that kept perfect pace with the frantic rhythm of my strokes. It wasn't the wake of our boat. It was something else, something moving just beneath the surface, matching our speed. I didn't dare look back. I just focused on the murky path ahead, my heart hammering a frantic drum against my ribs. The image of those 4 perfect, circular bruises burned onto the back of my eyelids. The marsh had taken what it wanted, and it had let us know, in no uncertain terms, that it wasn't finished. The days that followed were a blur of hollow sounds and strained silence. We told the sheriff's department about an alligator. It was the only story that made a shred of sense in the world we were supposed to be living in. They launched a search, of course. Men in airboats skimmed the surface of the Bayou Fouche, their propellers churning the dark water into a brown froth. They dragged, they probed, they found nothing. They called it off after 48 hours, their official report citing a probable fatal alligator attack. Though the seasoned deputies had a look in their eyes I recognized. The look of men who knew the pieces didn't quite fit. Russell didn't speak for 2 days. He just sat on my couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the wall. The 4 circular bruises on his ankle had faded from that livid purple to a sickly yellow-green, but they hadn't disappeared. They looked like permanent stains on his skin. He'd traced them with his finger, over and over, his face a mask of confusion and a simmering, defiant anger. On the 3rd day, he broke his silence. It was a gator. I was washing dishes, the running water making me flinch. I didn't answer. "It had to be," he insisted, his voice stronger, edged with a desperate need for conviction. "A big one. A log, maybe. I got tangled, panicked. That's all." I turned off the water and looked at him. The terror I'd seen in his eyes was gone, replaced by a stubborn, almost feverish glint. He couldn't live in a world where the marsh held hands that pulled you under. None of us could. "We're going back," he said. The protest died in my throat. I knew that look. It was the same look he'd had when he'd decided to jump off the old train trestle into the river, when he'd decided to ask Sarah out on a date. It was a look that brooked no argument. He needed to prove it to himself, to reclaim that piece of the world from the thing that had stolen it. He needed to see a gator, a sunken log, anything that could be explained, cataloged, and filed away. He needed to prove he wasn't crazy. So, against every screaming instinct in my body, I went with him. The fog was thinner this time, but the marsh felt no more welcoming. The silence felt watchful. We took my old battered John boat this time, the putter of its small outboard motor sounding obscenely loud in the hush. We found the spot too easily, as if it were calling to us. And there, exactly where we'd left it, was the bright orange kayak, still tethered to a cypress knee. But it wasn't as we'd left it. The Cheeto was scarred. Deep, parallel gouges raked across the orange hull, from the waterline down into the submerged fiberglass. They weren't random scratches. They were deliberate, savage furrows, spaced apart like the claws of some immense hand that had tried to grip the boat and drag it down. They were too wide, too deep for any gator I'd ever seen. Russell stared at them, his face pale. His theory of a panicked accident was crumbling before his eyes. "What the hell?" he whispered. That's when we heard the sounds. Not bubbles, not splashes. This was different. A low, wet gurgling, like water draining from a clogged sink, coming from a dense thicket of reeds to our left. And beneath it, a soft, rhythmic sound. A sound like breathing, slow, deep, and phlegmy, as if the lungs were full of water. "Hello?" Russell called out, his voice trembling. "Someone there?" The gurgling stopped. The breathing paused. Nothing moved. "It's just an animal," he said, more to himself than to me. He was trying to reassemble his reality, piece by piece. A nutria or something. Got its nest in there. He took a step toward the bank, one foot on the gunwale of the John boat. "Russell, don't," I pleaded, my hand going to the small hook blade knife I kept sheathed on my belt. It was a gut-deep reaction, a primal reach for a weapon. He ignored me. He had to see. He had to know. He stepped off the boat and onto the solid-looking bank. The moment his weight settled, the mud beneath his feet seemed to liquefy. It wasn't a yank this time. It was a surrender. The ground just opened up and swallowed him to the knees. He didn't even have time to scream before he was pulled down to his waist. I lunged, grabbing his outstretched hand, his fingers locked around my wrist with bone-crushing force. I braced myself in the boat, pulling with all my strength. For a single, hopeful second, I thought I was winning. Then I felt it. It started as a cold pressure around my own forearm, the one holding Russell. Something slick and impossibly strong was coiling around my wrist, climbing up towards my elbow. It wasn't a vine. It was muscular, purposeful, and freezing cold, like the deep water heart of the swamp itself. A putrid, stagnant smell filled the air, the smell of decayed vegetation and things long drowned. I looked down and saw nothing but the tea-colored water, but I could feel it, a grip that was pulling Russell down and now pulling me in with him. Russell's eyes were wide, his mouth open in a silent scream as he was submerged to his chest. The thing was taking us both. Terror became a pure, white-hot clarity. I let go of Russell with my other hand and yanked the hook blade free. I didn't think. I just sawed downwards into the cold, invisible pressure coiling around my arm. There was no sound, but I felt a jolt, a violent recoil through the water. The pressure vanished from my arm. Russell's grip on my wrist was torn away as he was dragged under in one swift, final motion. The water closed over his head without a bubble. The John boat rocked violently. I was screaming, a raw, endless sound of pure horror. I scrambled to the outboard, yanked the starter cord, and pointed the boat toward home. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The marsh was perfectly, utterly still. They never found a body. The official story remained an alligator attack. But in the bait shops and on the front porches of the old-timers, a different story began to be told in low, respectful tones. They speak of the marsh grip, a thing that is part of the water and the mud, a collector of souls for the swamp. They say it takes those who trespass too boldly, who forget that the marsh is a living, breathing entity with its own rules and its own hungers. I don't fish anymore. I can't even look at still water without feeling that cold, coiling pressure on my arm. I moved to the city, where the only water comes from taps and fountains. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I start awake, certain I can hear it, the soft, gurgling breath just outside my window, and the phantom ache of a grip that never, ever lets go. Subscribe if you believe survivors carry the weight of the truth. I escaped with my life, but Russell didn't. Don't be like the people who called me lucky and moved on. Subscribe if you think witnessing horror means something. And if you've ever felt guilty for surviving when someone else didn't, comment. I carry their story. They call this place the Deadwater. It ain't on any of the official maps of Tullahoma. Not really. It's a scar, a place everyone knows about and nobody talks about. The old Miller's Bend Reservoir, created back when they thought this valley was ripe for a fancy new housing development that never came. Now it's just a wide, dark bowl of water surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence and a whole lot of nothing. The only things that got built were a few skeleton houses, their bones picked clean by time and vandals. But me, Conga, and Fish, we talked about it all the time. It was our holy grail. "You sure this is the spot?" Conga whispered, his voice too loud in the evening hush. His real name was Kevin, but we called him Conga on account of how he could never sit still, his legs always drumming a rhythm only he could hear. "This is it," I said, jimmying the bolt cutters around a thick link in the fence. The snap was satisfying, a key turning in a forbidden lock. Old Man Hemlock at the bait shop said the catfish in here are monsters, said they grew fat on decades of silence. He also said they were possessed by the ghosts of disappointed real estate agents. Fish chimed in, hefting his fishing rod. His name was Michael, but he'd been Fish since first grade when he'd tried to eat a goldfish on a dare. He was the skeptic, the anchor to our wilder ideas. This is probably a waste of time. But he was here, wasn't he? That was the thing about the dead water. It pulled you in. For Conga, it was the thrill, the beat of a different drum. For Fish, it was the stubborn need to prove there was nothing special about it. For me, Jimmy, it was the silence. In a life full of trailer park noise and teachers telling you you'll never amount to anything, a place that was officially completely nothing felt like a kind of rebellion. We slipped through the gap in the fence, the three of us, a trio of trespassing shadows in the fading Tennessee dusk. The air was thick and warm, heavy with the smell of wet clay and honeysuckle gone wild. Before us lay the ghost of that failed development, a handful of half-built houses being slowly digested by kudzu, their empty window frames like dead eyes. A single, crooked lamppost stood sentinel over a street that led nowhere, its glass long since shattered. The silence here was different from the woods. It was a heavy, waiting silence, like the whole place was holding its breath. Cheerful, Fish muttered, his usual smirk looking a little strained. "Aw, come on, it's got character," Conga said, slapping him on the back. "Think of the stories, the echoes of shattered dreams." "I'm thinking about the tetanus from all this rust," Fish shot back. But he followed as I led the way down a crumbling asphalt path toward the water's edge. Our banter, usually a comfortable, raucous thing, felt thin and fragile out here, like tissue paper trying to hold back the dark. The jokes were a rope we were throwing each other, trying to pull ourselves back to a world that made sense. The reservoir itself was a sheet of polished slate under the bruised purple sky. It was perfectly, unnervingly still. No frogs croaked, no insects buzzed near its surface. It just was. A silver fog was beginning to unspool from the far shore, creeping tendrils sliding over the water towards us. That's when we saw it. A canoe. It was an old aluminum thing. The green paint blistered and peeling. It drifted, utterly without purpose, about 20 yards from shore. There was no one in it. "Well, that's convenient," Conga said, his voice losing its drum major confidence. We squinted. Inside the canoe, we could make out a small tackle box, a cheap spinning rod, and, most strangely, a heavy-duty flashlight, its beam cutting a weak, yellow path through the gathering fog. It was as if someone had just stepped out for a minute. "Probably some other idiot who cut the fence," Fish said, shrugging, though his eyes never left the drifting boat. "Had to take a leak and the current took it." He took a step toward the water's edge, a familiar, cynical grin finally returning to his face. "Might as well put it to good use. Save us getting our jeans wet. Bet that thing belonged to some old-timer who couldn't tie a proper knot." He had no way of knowing. None of us did. We couldn't feel the cold emptiness of the seats, or know that the old-timer he was joking about was a man named Eli, who'd drowned in this very reservoir 3 summers back. His body found weeks later tangled in the weeds, not far from where the canoe now drifted. We were just 3 boys, standing on the edge of a dead place, looking at a boat and seeing nothing but an opportunity. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. The canoe, with its ghostly, self-powered flashlight, was bad enough. It felt like a trap that had already been sprung for someone else. But Fish, ever pragmatic, was already wading shin-deep into the water, reaching for the gunwale. "Come on, you cowards. It's just a boat. Give me a hand." Conga and I exchanged a look. The bravado had drained from his face, leaving behind a pale, watchful anxiety. His legs were still. For the first time since I had known him, he was completely motionless. He wasn't looking at the canoe anymore. He was staring past it, across the wide, dark expanse of the reservoir. "Jimmy," he said, his voice low and hollow. "Who is that?" I followed his gaze. On the far shore, maybe 100 yards away, where the silver fog was thickest, a man was standing knee-deep in the water. He was tall and thin, a stark, dark silhouette against the fading twilight. He was perfectly still, facing us. The distance and the mist obscured his face, but I could feel his attention like a physical weight. Fish, who had managed to grab the canoe and pull it closer to shore, straightened up. "Who's what?" He turned, and his smirk finally died. "Oh." The four of us, me, Conga, Fish, and the silent man across the water, stood in a frozen tableau. The heavy silence of the dead water pressed in, broken only by the faint lap of water against the aluminum hull. "Hey!" Fish yelled, his voice cutting across the space. It didn't echo. The sound just hit the water and died. "You lose your boat?" The man didn't move, didn't raise a hand in greeting or acknowledgement. He just stood, a statue planted in the shallows. "Maybe he can't hear you," Conga whispered. "Or maybe he's deaf," Fish retorted, but his tone was uncertain. He cupped his hands around his mouth. "Hey, over here." Nothing. Then, the man moved. He didn't turn toward shore. He took a step forward, deeper into the reservoir. The black water swirled around his thighs. Another step. It was at his waist. With a terrible, deliberate slowness, he kept walking, as if descending an invisible staircase beneath the surface. The water rose to his chest, to his shoulders, and then it closed over his head. There was no splash, no struggle. He was just gone. A collective breath we'd all been holding escaped in a rush. "What the hell?" Fish breathed, backing away from the canoe. The surface where the man had vanished was perfectly calm for a count of 3. Then, maybe 50 yards closer to us, a head broke the surface. He was swimming now, but it wasn't a swim. There was no frantic splashing, no crawl or breaststroke. His arms didn't move. His body cut through the water in a straight, relentless line, creating a V-shaped wake that rippled out behind him. It was too fast, impossibly fast. A straight, silent shot directly toward our spot on the shore. That's when the panic hit. It was a contagion, swallowing us whole. Conga let out a strangled yelp. Fish abandoned the canoe, shoving it back into the water as he scrambled onto the bank. I didn't think. I just turned and ran. "Go, go, go," I screamed, my voice high with terror. We crashed back through the undergrowth, a stampede of fear. The jokes, the cynicism, the rebellion, it was all gone, stripped away by that silent, speeding shape in the water. As I glanced back, a final, chilling detail seared itself into my brain. The flashlight inside the drifting canoe. Its steady yellow beam flickered once, and then snapped off, as if an invisible hand had twisted the switch. We didn't stop running until we were through the cut fence, back on the safe side of the road, gasping for air in the dull glow of a distant streetlight. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say. We just split up, each heading to our own homes, carrying the silence of the dead water with us. Later that night, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Conga. No words, just a picture. It was a close-up of one of the wooden paddles from that damned canoe. The paddle we hadn't touched, etched into the wood, as if with a knife or a sharp stone, was a single word, the letters rough and deep. Conga. Sleep didn't come easy. When it did, it was thin and fractured. I dreamed I was back at the fence, the chain link cold against my face. The reservoir was a sheet of black glass under a moonless sky, and from the water's edge, carried on the still air, came a sound, a low, tuneless hum. It was a sound without joy or sorrow, the empty, vibrating hum of something that had been waiting a long, long time. And in the dream, I knew, with a certainty that turned my blood to ice, that it was humming his name. The days after we fled the reservoir bled into one another, a gray, shapeless smear of guilt and silence. Fish was gone. Not gone, as in he'd moved away. Gone, as in vanished. His mom had called my house, her voice tight with a fear that was already curdling into grief, asking if I'd seen him. I'd lied. I said we'd fished at the creek and he'd headed home. It was the last place anyone could confirm he'd been. But I knew where he was. We all did. Conga had packed up and left town to live with his aunt in Nashville 2 days after he sent me that picture. He didn't say goodbye. He was just gone too, in his own way. I was the only one left, and the weight of it was crushing me. I was the one who'd cut the fence. I was the one who'd called it a rebellion. I had to go back. I had to see. The hole in the fence was still there, a dark mouth, waiting. Walking through it this time felt like entering a tomb. The silence was absolute, deeper than before, as if the place had gotten what it wanted and was now sated. The abandoned houses seemed to watch me with a new, knowing malevolence. My heart was a frantic bird beating against my ribs as I made my way to the water's edge. The canoe was gone. The water was a flat, dead gray under an overcast sky. There was no sign of fish, no sign of the man, no sign of anything. It was just water. The sheer normalcy of it was the most horrifying thing of all. It had swallowed my friend without a trace, driven by a desperate need for an answer. Any answer. I went to the town library after, hiding in the dusty microfilm room. I scrolled through old issues of the Tullahoma Gazette, my hand shaking as I spun the wheel. I didn't even know what I was looking for until I found it. A small article from 15 years ago. The headline was brief. Local fisherman drowns in Miller's Bend Reservoir. My eyes scanned the text, my blood running cold. The man, Elias Finn McReady, had capsized his green aluminum canoe. Witnesses reported he'd gotten tangled in his own line while trying to retrieve the boat, and the weight of his waterlogged waders had pulled him under. They'd recovered his body a week later. They'd found him, the article said, not far from the old, half-built lamppost, and his nickname, the one everyone in town had called him since he was a boy, was printed right there in black and white. Fish. A sound, half gasp, half sob, escaped my throat. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a different person. The canoe, the nickname, the thing in the water hadn't just taken my friend. It had been wearing his name long before we were ever born. It had been waiting for him, for one of us. That night, I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, the name, Fish, burning in my mind. The house was quiet, too quiet. And then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound from outside my window. Not a hum, a splashing. My body went rigid. Every instinct screamed at me to pull the covers over my head, to hide, to pretend I was anywhere else. But I couldn't. A terrible gravitational pull drew me from my bed. I crept to the window, my breath fogging the cool glass. I looked out toward the distant, dark hollow where the reservoir lay. I couldn't see the water from here, not directly, but my window faced my dad's old pickup truck, its dark, dusty windshield angled toward the valley. And in the black reflection of that windshield, I saw the reservoir. It was impossible, a trick of light and shadow and my broken mind, but I saw it as clearly as if I were standing on its shore. The water was churning, disturbed, and there, just beneath the surface, was a face pressed up against the underside of the water as if it were ice. The features were blurred by the ripples, but they were unmistakable. It was my face. My own eyes, wide and staring, were looking up from the depths, meeting my gaze from across the distance. My own mouth was open in a silent, drowning scream. I stumbled back from the window, collapsing to the floor, my whole body trembling. The splashing outside had stopped. The night was silent again. I thought of the northern lake Steve had written about online, the woman who knew their names. I thought of William's story from the Louisiana marsh, the grip that took his friend. Different waters, different names, but the same empty eyes, the same patient, hungry silence. We were all connected, not by place, but by the thing that lived in the water, a thing that collected names and wore faces. Curled on the floor, the truth finally wrapped its cold, final fingers around my heart. I brought my hand to my mouth, the whisper a confession to the empty room. He was swimming toward us. I breathed, the memory of that silent, speeding V-wake, now a prophecy. And his face looked exactly like mine. Hit subscribe if you believe young people deserve honest warnings, not just stay out signs. We were just kids looking for adventure at the deadwater. Nobody told us why it was called that. Don't be like the adults who kept silent. Subscribe if you think the truth could save lives. If you've ever trespassed somewhere you shouldn't have, comment. Curiosity has a cost.